Why do I love nonfiction? You learn so much. How to pick the right breed of dog. How to lose weight in 28 days. How to heal with crystals and chakra energy. How to decorate your house with perfect neutrals. How to grow up. How to write a dirty story. Aloha and welcome back to my channel, The Baby Boomer Booktuber, with me, Marilyn Maya. I'm very excited today because I'm going to do a tag. It's not my first tag, but it's a tag that I really love. It's a non-fiction book tag, and it was created by Olive from abookolive. And if you're not following her, you really should. She's a wonderful booktuber. Anyway, I'll start reading the questions. Let's get at it. Number one is, how much nonfiction do you read? Well, I don't read as much as I used to. I started with fairy tales when I was very small, and then I went on to nonfiction. I write memoir, and in my second memoir that I'm editing right now, my first chapter has a book in it. And I say, I read a book from the library, How to Be Popular When You're Pretty Ugly. Of course, the last part wasn't in the real book, but that shows you how important books were to me and in my life. So the first question starts with, how much nonfiction do you read? And like I said, not as much as I used to, but Booktube is changing that. And I'm picking up much more nonfiction books. Number two is, what kind of nonfiction do you make or want to make on Booktube? Well, I started a series on the 4 agreements, and I would like to continue to make videos that help people who suffer from mental illness or other conditions and help them. That's sort of my main reason for joining Booktube, is to, since I'm older, to be a help in this community. And it's called Mental Health Mondays, if you're interested. Number 3, what's your favorite subgenre of nonfiction? That's a difficult question because in my almost 7 decades of reading, that changes. That changed with what I was into at the time. In my early years, I was very much interested in how-to books, and that continued on until lately, really. And I remember I was into astrology, and I was into getting better grades, and I looked in the library for all these books on how to be a better human being. Now, I look for books like memoirs, because I write memoir, and books about women, diverse women, or women like me from different cultures. And I'm still looking for that book. I think that's why I wrote a memoir, is because I couldn't, the story that I wanted to tell, I couldn't find in other books. So I wrote my own, or I'm writing my own. And I wanted to write a book from a perspective of a woman who comes from different cultures and how that affects a woman growing up, and also growing up with a bipolar mother. So that's how my interest in mental health and mental health books were brought about. So I read a lot of memoirs, but there's a caveat in that, because I don't like all the memoirs that I read, and I feel kind of guilty in saying that because people might not like my memoir. But I think a lot of memoirs are written by people who are not ready to look back and expand on what they learned from their life. And sometimes I think people should just take, you know, if something traumatic happens to you, you should wait and see how you process that before you write a memoir. So I've read a lot of bad memoirs. I've read a lot of good memoirs. I've read a lot of self-indulgent memoirs. And I read a lot of memoirs that keep you apart. They try to avoid that, so they keep you distant from the memoir writer. So I still love memoirs, and there are so many out there, and I'm learning more from the Booktube community, the nonfiction Booktube community in specifically, that are bringing books to me that are memoirs that are just what I'm looking for. Number 4, do you have a favorite nonfiction book? Like I said, I'm 70 years old, so I read many, many books. But if I had to pick one book, it's Night by Elie Weisel. Because this book not only is part of my culture because I'm half Jewish, but it also taught me how to survive anything. Because he had to survive so much. His father's death, seeing people being murdered around him, and he went on to a wonderful life. So this book has affected me, as many other Holocaust memoirs do. But for some reason, this book affected me even more than others. I can't really say that. I would say that this book stood out. Okay, so the next question is, number 5, what do you think keeps people from reading nonfiction? Okay, I have to be honest here. I think it's the internet, Google in particular. When I was young, we didn't have something like Google, which is fast, and you can find out everything. We had to search for it. We had to look. And I think that's what keeps people from reading nonfiction, is everything has come so easy. So they don't want to go to the library or look for a book that goes into things deeply. They just want a fast answer. And people's, I hate to say the younger generation, but it's true. I think that the attention span of young people, even older people, even me, are have a much less attention span. We have a much less attention span than we used to. And I think that keeps us from reading nonfiction. Okay. What's a nonfiction book you read because of Booktube? Well, I'm really new to Booktube, so I'm in the process of reading books. One book that I'm reading now and I'm really loving is The Turkish Lover by Esmeralda Santiago, a fellow Boricua like myself. And I had read her first book, or attempted to, when I was Puerto Rican. And I couldn't connect with it because I wasn't born in Puerto Rico. But I did notice that she had a wonderful style. But in this book, she's older. She's having almost the same experiences that I had growing up. I think she's about my age. She might be a little younger. And I really connected with it. I found her experiences growing up in a Puerto Rican neighborhood, and just everything about it. Going to the High School of Performing Arts, which I was accepted to go into. I mean, dancing, everything, except I didn't have a Turkish lover. But I'm really enjoying it, and I want to thank a few booktubers for giving me this, for suggesting this book, and I will do that later. So that's one book. Another book that I haven't read yet, but I never heard of if it wasn't for Booktube, is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. And this is a sad but wonderful book, and I'm not going to tell you about it now because I already spoke about it in another video, but also I want to keep everything a surprise. I don't want to spoil it for myself. But that's a book I never heard of until Booktube. Okay. So what's the best nonfiction book you've read lately? Okay. That's Lucky by Alice Sebold. As I said in my last November TBR book haul, I was triggered by this at first because of a similar experience. So I had skimmed it before, but now I read it all the way through, and I think it's her best book. She's the author of The Lovely Bones, which was like a bestseller. And I don't know if she wrote this book before that or after that. I think she wrote it before that. But this is a courageous book. In a similar way, That Night is a courageous book. So I suggest this book is great. It's the best book I've read so far since I joined Booktube. Okay, 9. What are some of your nonfiction reading goals? I don't really have nonfiction reading goals because nonfiction is so much part of my life, as you can see in all my books. But I want to continue reading nonfiction because it's such a learning experience. Nonfiction is truth. When you write fiction, it's fake. You're making things up. It's storytelling, which is wonderful. And fiction is facts. So you're learning something. You're learning truth. And that's what I love about nonfiction. Number 10 is, what's your advice for incorporating more nonfiction into your reading diet? That's difficult because we live such complicated lives right now. But this is a perfect time during the pandemic to expand your reading styles. And what I'll say is to be open to it, because nonfiction is not just boring books. How about, I have a good idea, start reading an audiobook in a subject that you like. I don't like audiobooks, but I think that some books that are nonfiction are better read as audiobooks. One book I wish I had read on audiobook is Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Powers of Sleep and Dreams by Matthew Walker, PhD. The reason that I wish I read it on audiobook is because, not because it was a bad book or boring, but I knew a lot of the information because I read about different things about sleep because I have sleep issues. So I wish I could have skipped a little bit, and I think this book would be really good on audio, as well as some memoirs I heard. But I did read A Poet X as an audiobook, and for that book, I don't think, I mean, even though the author read it beautifully, I think I would prefer to have seen the book as a print book. Okay, now the last thing is to give some recommendations of booktubers who read nonfiction that you follow or that you recommend. And of course, I want to recommend over and over again Olive at abookolive. She does a lot of nonfiction, and because of her, I really expanded my nonfiction reads. And there's also a small booktuber, Alba of Seriala. She's located in Puerto Rico, and she does a lot of nonfiction. She's a wonderful person, and I just love her. She starts with Spanish, which really brings me back to my roots. And I have to give a shout out also to Kazen of Always Doing, because she's the one who gave me the name. She gave me a message that I should follow Alba. So thank you, Kazen. And Always Doing is a wonderful channel too. And of course, I want to say again, Catherine of Taking Tea with Catherine, because she does a lot of history, nonfiction history books about the Victorian age. And I want to get into that. I never really read much about that. So she really gives me a lot of enthusiasm for doing that. And finally, the last is a new booktuber that I just became familiar with, and her name is MercysBookishMusings. And she's from UK, I think. And she just said in her last video that she loved memoirs, so of course I'm very excited. And there's many others that incorporate nonfiction, but these were the first booktubers that I read, that I watched because of their nonfiction. So I would start with those, and I'm going to put everything down in the description box for you to look at. So until we meet again, my friends, and forget about the teaser where I read a dirty book, because I don't know how that got in there. It was an accident, really. So please subscribe to my channel if you're so inclined, and hit the notification bell, share, like, and until we meet again, my friends, aloha oi.